Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Hoven, your host of the Difference Makers podcast. This is a place where people come together that are making a difference for those who want to make a difference. And that's you. We're bringing thought leaders together in a sense of fusion where ideas and concepts and personalities are all driven together into one place at one time. And this is no different. In this episode, you're going to see cool things from cool people making a difference. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's time for another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast. And it's such a great time for me to be with you because we are doing some amazing things here. And you're going to meet, actually not meet, you're going to re-meet someone who's been all over social media because they're getting all kinds of attention in helping a group of people that helps a group of people. Specifically, Joe LoRusso, he's the director of our aviation division here at Ramos Law. And his passion is taking care of pilots who then take care of you, the public, by flying them around and taking care of you and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to dive right into that. But before we get started, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that bell icon because it's going to let you know every time a new episode arrives. And if you're listening to us, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please make sure you send this to someone if you like it, and also subscribe. And finally, if this rings to your heart, if it gives you value, would you please give us a 5-star review because that will give more credibility for other people just like you that want to make a difference to hear from people like Joe who are making a difference. So with all that being said, time to jump in. Joe LoRusso, welcome back, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, you've been busy. You've been running around like crazy all across the country, trial work and doing all these things to help pilots. Catch us up a little bit on what's new in the life of Joe LoRusso, pilot, Joe LoRusso, director of aviation, and what's new in the division.
Sure. Yeah. On the pilot side of the house, I just got a new type rating this weekend. So I'm now type rated in a Phenom 300 jet. So
that means you're able to fly that jet when you say you got a rating of that.
Yep. I can now fly that jet. Just went and did that in airplane, which is a new experience altogether. Usually we do it in simulators. But went down for a weekend and did it Saturday and Sunday in Mississippi and flew the entire thing in the jet with the FAA on board.
And what's the difference in that jet versus other jets that you fly? Does it have more horsepower, more this or that? Like what's the difference needing a separate rating?
Sure. So the Phenom 300E is an amazing airplane. It is it can fly up to flight level 450, Mach 8.0. It's fast, it's sleek, and it is highly automated. It's really the first jet that I've flown where I have to train myself to get out of the jet's way, right? Usually it's, what is the jet doing? Let me fix it. This time it was, what am I doing that is wrong? And why is the jet mad at me?
Wow.
So, airplanes are getting so smart nowadays. I hope that we never reach a point where pilots are not needed. But certainly after the Phenom, it's looking like that might be a thing here soon.
That's crazy.
So I was definitely the weak link of that airplane.
So now you're certified to fly that?
Certified to fly that.
And then with respect to what's going on in the division, I know you're helping so many people with their pilot's licenses, making sure that those are safe and our pilots are taken care of, and you're doing trials. What's the latest there?
Yeah, so the division is booming on the certificate defense side. We have Matt Bulow, who just came on as a new certificate defense attorney.
Such a great writer.
Amazing writer. Really talented writer coming out of DU Law. And then Zeke Dennison, of course, who's managing that division and making sure that all these pilots are taken care of. It's fantastic. We're seeing a new, I don't want to say a new world of the FAA, but we're seeing a lot of pushback to the FAA, which we've never really seen before. And that's an interesting time for us right now. I'll tell you what's interesting about it, what kind of puts into perspective, is every year all the HIMSS doctors, the HIMSS AMEs, the HIMSS psychs, the HIMSS neuropsychs, and then pilots, all the pilots that are listening will know what I'm saying with HIMSS. They all come together in Denver for a week-long convention. And usually that's what I call drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like it's, the FAA is the greatest, the HIMSS program's the greatest, we're all doing an awesome job keeping the sky safe. And this year was the first year where there was a little bit of rub, I thought, coming from the docs and the AMEs questioning the FAA that was putting on the conference of, hey, why are we doing that? Hey, that doesn't make sense. explain to me why I'm doing this. I've never really seen those type of call and responses happening at the HIMSS program.
That's crazy. And for those people that may not know, the HIMSS program is something that's designed, it was originally designed to help pilots get treatment or needed help or assessments if they needed something to make sure the skies are safe. But then it's kind of morphed into something that is akin to, well, I'll let you explain what it's akin to, but yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's morphed into money. You're 100% right. It was about the clinical need for pilots who are suffering with, at that time, substance abuse, substance dependence, where they were able to find treatment and medication and therapy in order to get themselves safe and get themselves back in the cockpit, a new person. And that has morphed over the years, and it has become less about the medicine and more about control and money. And we see pilots who have 3 DUIs and a gun charge getting the exact same program as somebody who had a DUI 2 decades prior in college.
Or someone who has anxiety, right? Or someone just suffering from stress like the rest of us.
Yes. Yeah. So, you get this kind of blanket care where it's, we're not sure which box you fit into, so you fit into the box. And that has now, like I said, this year is kind of, we have doctors going, why am I doing that? Why am I giving this guy 14 UAs when he had a DUI 2 decades ago when he was 19? What about his life in the last 20 years have shown a need or developed a clinical need now that we're concerned about alcohol use? It just doesn't make sense. And so this is the first year that we actually saw doctors questioning the FAA on that. And then the FAA taking a more defensive position and taking a more of a look at, like the tide is coming, right? That this program is going to need to be revamped.
And part of that's, I'm not trying to necessarily toot your horn / the horn of the division, of our division, our aviation division. But as I remember, you guys have been asked to be on councils and, committees and that kind of thing on this or some sort of tangentially related issue, right?
Yep.
That's leading to some of this disruption.
Yeah, so both Zeke and myself are on the board of directors for the Pilot Mental Health Campaign, PMHC, and they're campaigning on the Hill in D.C. For legislative change, which we've never seen that, at least in the time that I've been in aviation over the past 2 decades. I have never seen a legislative effort like we're seeing right now. And usually we would always try and push legislative changes. We try and meet with senators. We try and meet with congressmen, congresswomen to try and get some change. But it always, if I'm very honest with you, fell on deaf ears. And it fell on deaf ears because I would have senators say to me, Joe, I can't push this. My contingent, the people that I represent, they want safe skies, right? And there's no way that I can push for legislation which would allow a pilot to get mental health treatment, because then my people know that there's a pilot who suffers from depression flying a United airplane. And that alone, that sentence sounds scary. Even to me, that sentence sounds scary. And so we never ever got that push from senators. It always kind of fell on deaf ears. Now we have that push where they're realizing it's okay to have a diagnosis in the front of the airplane as long as that is managed, as long as that is treated, as long as that is asymptomatic. That's fine.
Yeah, because think about this. How many people driving a semi-truck, driving a car, operating a boat or heavy equipment have some sort of diagnosis?
Yes.
We're humans, and humans across all spectrums and modems are going to have mental health diagnosis, other issues, and they can be managed. They need to be managed. So why would it be any different for people in the skies? Like, that's not even realistic.
Yeah, 100% right. And so now we have a new bill that just came and hit the floor with Congressman Casson. It's on the floor of the House right now, and it's the Aviation Medication Transparency Act, is I believe what it's called, and basically saying to the FAA, tell us which medication are okay for pilots to use, and tell us which drugs are not okay. And on the not okay list, tell us why. Tell us why. Because there are some medications where the FAA will say, well, that has a side effect. The FDA says that has a side effect of drowsiness. Okay, well, let's look at the FDA study. Let's figure out what the percentage was, right? Maybe it's only like 30% had drowsy and 70% people did not have drowsiness, right? So can we look at our airmen on a case-by-case basis, like the regs say? Can we look at our airmen and say, this pilot took this drug. They're well controlled. They're asymptomatic, and plus they're not drowsy. They don't experience that side effect that 30% of the populace does. So by publishing that list of medications and the reason why medications are blacklisted, we can better serve our constituents, our clients, and say, hey, this person is okay, even though they're taking a blacklisted drug, they're okay from a symptomology standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then they would be managed and monitored if that's the case, as opposed to someone who's not. I really feel like this is similar, and I want to go into kind of the consumer portion, how it affects the average, person who flies and is flown by a pilot in a minute. But it kind of is akin to me to law enforcement and to a degree special forces, where if you report something, we're trying to be in the middle of a change where that's okay. Because back in the day, as a law enforcement person or in the military, you didn't want to report that you might be going through something, whether it's physical pain or mental pain, because it could affect you in your mission, in your service, in your future. And it sounds like this is part of that old school mentality that now maybe is being disrupted a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're exactly right. Like, for example, in the Air Force, we now have PTSD waivers for pilots, right? You can come out and say that you have PTSD. You can get treatment for PTSD. They put a waiver on your medical saying, we've reviewed the PTSD. We agree with the diagnosis. We agree with the treatment. We agree with the clinical care. Good to fly.
And that doesn't transfer into the civilian flying, even though the Air Force people that are flying the most expensive jets in the world that have the most potential to hurt a lot of people, they can manage that, but I won't say any particular airline. The airlines can't.
Yes. Yeah, correct. Yeah, FAA is God.
Wow.
Yep, they are above the Air Force.
Has this had any correlation or spillover into what common travelers experience in the way of, their airplane travel? Because I know I've seen on the news more in the last year than I ever remember seeing before about pilot issues in the skies. Even pilot issues. Wasn't it here in Denver where the dude was so upset he was hammering on the guard that stops people in the road because he was, late for work or something happened.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is there a spillover for all this inability to report that leads to something that we would feel impacted by as travelers?
Yes. So what's cool about this, taking a little bit step back, what's cool about this is we kind of have a bandwagon going on right now, where we have a legislative push. We're posting things on social media. We're having this big drive. We're going toe to toe with the FAA, saying this is wrong, and now you can no longer accept it, and you can no longer bury your head in the sand. You have to change this, and that bandwagon is spreading now to airline unions. For the first time, we're being contacted by unions, and unions saying, "Joe, we're on board. What are we doing?" They used to, tote the line, shut up, and make sure that medical is tight, right? And as long as we don't say anything, we're fine. And now, for the first time, we're seeing airlines saying, "No, we agree. This is ridiculous, and we want to get treatment." So as they push, I'm sure we're going to see some sort of yo-yo effect with the industry where, maybe pilots are going on strike every once in a while. They're not going to take it. And so flights are going to get canceled, right? As that rub occurs between the unions and the airlines and the FAA. I'm sure that yo-yo effect will happen. But what's nice about that is we have change, right? It's going to ultimately benefit the consumer in that you can feel confident that your pilot up front, even though they may have a condition of anxiety, depression, they're getting treated. They're not sitting there letting that build and stew until the point where they eventually have a mental break. They're getting treatment. So it's better for the consumer. So, I apologize on behalf of the industry that consumers are going to have to ride this yo-yo effect as we go toe-to-toe with the FAA on this issue. And there's going to be bumpy roads ahead, but it's ultimately for a smoother, safer sky.
For sure. And the airline industry seems like it's having its own share of issues right now with respect to software glitches that are causing delays for weeks at a time, that you were part of middle of this year or something. Yeah. And all of these things. And I know that we're seeing even people kind of freaking out in some planes. Like, the airline industry is, would you say from your perspective, is it have a bit of a reputation issue right now, or does it still fly the friendly skies? I mean, even though Southwest is undergoing for lack of a better term, almost a takeover on how they're trying to do what they do.
Right.
And they're changing everything.
Yes.
potentially ripping up a culture of one of the most successful businesses ever. And so what is from your perspective, what is the overall outlook on the airline industry?
Yeah, so the airline industry right now, it's cyclical, and it kind of has these peaks and it has these valleys. And right now we're definitely in a low. And we're in a low right now because all the major 121 carriers, all the airline carriers are in a hiring freeze right now.
So they're not hiring any pilots. Is there a reason why?
They're not hiring any pilots, and there's a number of reasons why. And that always happens. People freak out. The public freaks out and goes, oh my God, something's wrong with the airlines. This is, if you look back on the history of the airlines, this has always happened. They freak out and they go, we don't have enough pilots, hire everyone. And so they're hiring like crazy, everybody. And then all of a sudden they go, okay, we have too many pilots and we don't have enough airplanes. We have too many pilots, not enough airplanes, freeze everything. And then it drops down, and then all of a sudden they go, oh my God, we don't have enough pilots, hire everything. And now there's a lot of reasons for that right now. We definitely have a lot of negotiation and contract disputes happening across the 121s. Last year was a very big year for that, but we still have some ripple effect now from some of the other carriers, the smaller carriers, when they see what the bigger carriers got, the legacy carriers got in their negotiations. So we definitely have that issue going on right now. But then obviously we have Boeing. Boeing's a very big issue. Finally, somebody shined a spotlight on that atrocity and said, you guys are not doing this right. So when Boeing was in the past delivering, 6-7 airplanes a month to a carrier, now they're delivering one airplane every 3 months, right? So we don't have as many airplanes going into the fleet as we once had, which again is good for the public, right? Because the airplanes that we do have going in once every 3 months are mechanically sound, inspected, and ensured that they're going to be a good airplane, as opposed to get this thing off the line and put it on that line. So that's happening as well. And then of course, technology, right? The airlines are historically behind in technology, and they're behind not out of fault of their own. I think that the airlines could keep up with technology as the industry evolves, and they can be as dynamic as the industry. But what's stopping them is, again, the FAA and the regulations, right? So, for example, back in the day, we're not too far off from when iPads were illegal in the cockpit, where pilots used to have to carry these big, what we call the jet Bibles, these big books of, approaches and airways and maps. And they would carry that doctor's bag, the famous airline pilot bag.
Yes, I remember seeing those. Yeah, for sure.
And there was rotator cuff lawsuit after rotator cuff lawsuit of those guys having to reach back and grab this huge bag and pull it forward to flip through to get their charts. And it took forever for the FAA to allow iPads that has all that stuff.
Were they worried that like they tell you when you're a passenger, turn off your portable electronic devices because it could mess up something with and interfere with flight stuff? Is that why
they're worried about everything. Yeah, they were like, how is this thing getting power? What if it dies? Every worry under the sun. And so what happened is pilots were basically just bringing iPads, right? And bringing the Jet Bible and then just like leaving that and then going through the iPads. So, the FAA is just archaic, and they are so slow to advance regulations that it's impossible for an airline industry to keep up on a technological standpoint, because they can't ever surpass the FAA, right? The FAA's got to keep them in check. If you look right now, this is going to be a big plug, Elon, call me. But if you look at Elon Musk and you look at SpaceX's Twitter or X,
yeah.
Hilarious. In the last 3 weeks, he has been on a campaign against the FAA, just an absolute march, saying that they are the greatest hindrance to space travel that this country has ever seen. Wow. Because they cannot get permits to launch. They cannot get permits to land. They can't get permits from the FAA for literally anything, economic effects, environmental effects, that the FAA is moving so slow, and Elon saying, we can't do anything.
And so companies like SpaceX and others that are trying to do this, including, would it be NASA that's subject to FAA regulation and stuff? So FAA is over these types of people as well.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, they own the entire airspace. NASA's got to go through the FAA to get to NASA, right? They got to go through the FAA to get to space, to NASA. And it is hilarious, Elon's new social media campaign against the FAA. But I really do believe that is one of the biggest restrictions into progress within the airline industry, that they just can't keep up. They literally can't keep up because the FAA is keeping the foot on the throat.
Yeah. It's crazy to me. And that has had a ripple effect that has led to you being busier in the sense that more people are reaching out to you and asking you to come talk with them about pilot safety and things of that nature and how all of these things intertwine. Can you share a couple of these groups or the messaging of the types of groups that are asking you to talk and what they're asking you to share?
Yeah, so we have a big problem with transparency in the FAA. Big problem with transparency in the industry on the whole. So a lot of the groups are mostly owner groups and pilot groups that are calling me out to go speak to basically be their mouthpiece from the FAA to say, hey, this is what's happening behind closed doors. This is how they evaluate this. This is what they're going to do in the future. This is what they're talking about right now. This is what's on the House floor. This is the next bill coming through, because that information is not being conveyed by the FAA. They're not telling the public and the industry what's going on. So I feel like kind of the messenger at every single event that I speak at.
And the reason that you're essentially this antenna receiving all this information is because I imagine in part all of the cases that you and Zeke and Matt and then your whole paralegal team are doing that are interfacing so closely with them that you're hearing from them the denials, the acceptance, the this and that. So you're seeing it in real time at ground level, which allows you then to take it and disseminate it at a higher level. Is that
That's
accurate?
100% right. Yeah, we call ourselves boots on the ground. So we're in the trenches. We're seeing what's happening day in, day out. So when the FAA speaks at like the HIMSS conference and says, for example, this is the greatest line that came out of the HIMSS conference was they said, we're 60 days to review a packet to return a decision on an airman medical. And all of us just laughed. Like, no, you're not. You're 9 to 13 months. You haven't been 60 days since maybe like 1960. So the FAA is announcing that stuff to the world as, look at us, 60 days. And then you're exactly right. We're in the trenches dealing with case after case after case after case, hundreds and thousands of airmen pushing through the system going, no, you're not. That's not what the numbers show.
Yes.
So,
wow.
And the FAA doesn't keep those numbers, which is fun. So if you do a FOIA and say, hey, what's the average wait time? They don't keep track of that. That's not a statistic that they own. So that FOIA would come back with nothing. So without boots on the ground, without seeing a mass volume of cases, there is literally no way to know what the FAA is actually doing.
So they can say anything they want because there's no metric to measure against whatever their standard is.
You're exactly right.
So you're keeping the stats and you can go to them, especially if you have to go in front of a courtroom.
Yes.
And say, they actually said 60 days. They said at this conference, here's this one took 13 months.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So in effect, we're keeping that static, that statistic.
Does the FAA find you guys a hindrance to them directly? Like, do they appreciate what you're trying to do? And is there conferences where they're like, oh, here's LoRusso and Ramos Law with aviation again. These guys are the bane of our existence. Or do they want to change? It's just such a big ship that it takes eons to change it.
So, yeah, complex question. There, especially with when it was Zeke and I, we always call ourselves yin and yang. I have a very different strategy when dealing with the FAA. That I call a spade a spade. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's probably wrong. And that's what the FAA, that's what the FAA is to me. Zeke is more of a nurturing, hey, I see your point of view. Here's our point of view. And the two styles work very well, and it's very case dependent. And the best part about Matt now is Matt has gotten to see both styles, and Matt can identify cases that would benefit from one style or the other style, and he can approach it depending on which one he thinks is best in that circumstance. So yeah, there is definitely a love-hate relationship with the FAA. And that is different depending on what division we're talking about within the FAA. It's a multi-headed beast, and most of the heads don't communicate with each other. So I have some divisions that, that are they love the campaign. They love us going at the FAA, even though they work within the FAA saying, yeah, Joe, this needs to change. This is ridiculous. And then there are other sides of the FAA that are, we don't get along. We're not friends.
Yeah, they're trying to protect their own house.
Correct.
At that point.
Yeah, correct.
Wow. Where do you see this going in the future? You talked earlier and you kind of referenced that, there's some rumblings that for the first time at the conference that you mentioned that the two sides were a little bit maybe at odds or at least questioning each other or questioning the HIMSS program and this kind of thing. Do you see this being something that's in the near term going to make a big difference and take a turn? Or is this, again, such a big ship is going to take a very long time?
The new guard has to come. So we are seeing AMEs that are aging out right now.
And those are examiners.
Yeah,
correct. Medical examiners.
Yep. And we're seeing psychs that are aging out. And we're seeing members of the FAA that are aging out. And they're being replaced with people that are willing to ask the questions. And I think that was the big change in this new conference was you have the new guard, right? The new AMEs that are saying, I don't think so. This doesn't seem right. And so as the old guard phases out and the new come in, we have to change. There's no way that we're not going to change. So I think there will be people that will be forced out, that don't age out, but will forced out as the greater populace ages out.
And so, do you see a way to make sure that the people that are coming in to replace those folks have a more contemporary and a more relevant view? So that it's not just the old dog grooming the new dog to be the old dog?
Yeah, that's a great point. They're coming in under so much scrutiny. The new people are coming in under, new bills that are on the House right now, on the House floor. They're coming in on social media campaigns. They're coming in on the NTSB doing safety roundtables. They're coming in on documentaries about this.
Which you were on one.
Yeah,
right?
Recently. Yep.
Plug that documentary real quick. It's so good.
Yeah, it's an amazing documentary. It was New York Times, Lie to Fly. It's available on Hulu and Apple and Prime, I believe. The team, the New York Times team, did an amazing job telling this story. So a fantastic documentary. I'll be honest with you, I was nervous about watching it. It's like you're seeing your baby and you're seeing your life's passion and very much my identity on display on Hulu. And I was very, very nervous about watching it. And
were you nervous that they were going to turn it and twist your words into a different message?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, on a very, very international scale.
Yes.
Something that would be very hard for me to walk back.
Yeah.
And they did a fantastic job.
What's been the feedback you've gotten from that?
Nothing but positivity. Gotten emails, texts, messages on social media platforms saying thank you very much for saying what you said.
Wow.
So,
mostly from pilots?
Pilots and family members. I've gotten a lot of family members of spouses of pilots saying, thank you very much. I've been trying to tell my spouse to get treatment. So, it's been overwhelming, like really emotionally overwhelming.
Dude, that's so cool. I'm so proud of you for doing that because that takes a lot. I mean, I know that you had to take a lot of time out of your schedule to do that.
Yeah.
And like you say, the trust factor. I know if that were me, I'd be feeling the same way. Like, man, I'm putting a lot in your hands to tell this story the way it's intended. So that is amazing. And it brought up something. You and I had a meeting with a pilot, and this was a couple of years ago now. You'll probably remember it. This guy was a very accomplished pilot. If I recall right, he came out of the military, he went into pilot, and then he aged out as a pilot. And something happened. Remember, something happened. He had disciplinary action or something.
Yeah.
And he couldn't get back in because he was too old.
Yeah.
Is there? It brings me to this line, and I don't know if it doesn't necessarily apply to the HIMSS program, but it does make me think of piloting in general and safety. Should there be an age limit, or is that sort of a discrimination? Like, you shouldn't be able to fly after this unless you can pass this test versus that test, like any other kind of discrimination. Is there something to discrimination overall in the airline industry? That's
a great question. So that was recently on the FAA reauthorization bill. And the reauthorization bill that got introduced last September was they were trying to raise the mandatory retirement age of an airline pilot from 65 to 67. Now, the reason they were doing that was because of the pilot shortage. So they were trying to keep what we already have without realizing that our aeromedical standards, nobody's even making it to 65, let alone going to 67. But it's interesting that you say that. So if you look at the rest of the world, for example, ICAO in Europe, right, and EASA regs, basically the FAA equivalent over in Europe, they have their age requirement, and this is a good one for commercial, is at 65, you have to have a break in the cockpit. So if somebody is 65, you have to have somebody under 65 to be in the cockpit with them. Over 65 gets under 65. And I think that's a great rule. It literally is just, we all know as we get older cognitively, our reaction time gets slower, our processing time gets slower, our memory gets worse. That doesn't mean you're not a capable pilot. you just may be a little bit slower, right? So you match that with somebody a little bit younger in the cockpit, and their times are still up in the reaction time, and they get a benefit from all this experience, and they get to learn everything that this person has while safely covering them on reaction time and memory and stuff like that.
What a great point.
It's a fantastic way to do things. And I don't think that's age discrimination. I think that's just being a realist.
Yeah.
In a very dangerous environment.
Yes, that makes total sense to me. And it's like, I watch some of these shows where I'm seeing these, I'll call them athletes, and most of these folks, there's some in the US, but there's also a lot in Asia. These people, the way they stay fit is doing Tai Chi, yoga, this and that, and then calisthenics. And I've watched these guys in their 70s and 80s doing straight up, strict pull-ups with muscle ups, and then dropping down and doing a bunch of push-ups like a CrossFit athlete, and they're like 4% body fat.
Yeah.
The point I make to that is not all blank-year-olds are created equal.
Yeah.
And so I think by having a blanket age when you're restricted to fly is, as you say, leaving so much experience on the table for the younger pilots. And also I think that from time to time, these folks could use a lesson from some of these older, more seasoned pilots about how to treat people that they're flying, whether that be the flight attendants or even the passengers, right? There's still a customer service thing versus just walking in and flying a plane.
So true. Yeah. My mentor in jets, he is still flying today, and he's 83 years old, and he is more fit than I am, has less body fat than I do, and is more of a pilot than I will ever be. And he is still flying at 83 years old. I mean, to cap him and to say somehow, hey, you're done, you can't fly anymore, would be ridiculous.
And I know from what you said, for people that are not pilots that are watching or listening to this, I've been around you for years now. And what I know is that when you're a pilot in the DNA. It's almost like a calling. Like I was called to be a chiropractor, right? When I went through that training, that was what I was meant and put on the earth to do in that time of my life. And pilots are the same way. So to say that you have all the abilities and you have all that, it's akin to telling someone else, hey, you can't drive anymore.
Right.
And so if they have the abilities to do that, you're sucking the life out of their soul because of a requirement.
Yeah. Because of an arbitrary number.
Yeah. Insanity.
Yeah.
Insanity. What do you see next for you?
So the division, I will tell you on the division side of it, of Ramos Law's aviation division, the certificate defense is booming. I'm sure we're going to be adding more attorneys to it. Pilots need representation. They will always need advocacy, and we are very happy to fill that need. I see on that side of the house going more into the legislative world, pushing more on the Hill, so that what I always say is make a macro change, right? It's one thing to have a micro fight, right? To fight these individual battles. But when you're fighting the same battle, right? When you're fighting for that same ground over and over again and going back to the trenches and then same ground, then back to the trenches, same ground, back to trenches, it gets, you get nowhere. You don't gain any ground. So having a macro fight where we're lobbying, we're on the floor, we're introducing bills, we're commenting on bills, we're at Senate hearings trying to change the industry, I think that's going to be a big push for that side of the house. On the crash side of the house, so we also do crash law, and that's more what I'm focused on these days is the crash law. Right now we have crash cases in Florida, Kansas, Idaho, California, Oregon, Texas, and Arizona, and then of course Colorado. We are all over the country, and unfortunately, we are seeing more and more crashes.
Why?
And I think that's a great question. So I think when the pilot shortage was in its prime, when it was raging, and the airlines were going, we need pilots now, we had these flight schools that popped up seemingly overnight, and they were cranking people through in like 2 months. And they were going from green, no flight experience, to a flight instructor in like 60 days. And then they were going back and teaching new green pilots. So you had flight instructors that had 250 hours to their name, 300 hours to their name, teaching brand new people. And so when those people experience an emergency on an airplane, it was a first-time emergency for everybody on board, right? There just wasn't that experience of, what you think of the old salty flight instructor hanging out at the airport, right?
Yes.
That wasn't there. It was young people who they'd just gotten in an airplane 2 months prior for the first time in their lives, and now they're tasked with teaching a new person how to fly an airplane. So I think that has certainly been a factor in our recent numbers. So.
Is there any culpability to those flight schools if they are putting out pilots that they find are now tied into those crashes?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a lot of onus on flight schools that they need to still police their product, right? Instead of just, I can make, X amount of money, right? 100,000, 120,000 on VA money, flipping this guy in 60 days. You still have to be safe, right? You still owe a duty to the public. You still owe a duty to the people on the ground, in the air. And I think that was lost a little bit during that big push, that big pilot craze. And, a waiver will solve everything, right?
Yeah.
All we got to do is put a waiver in front of them. We're not responsible. Cash that check.
So final question.
Yeah.
As it relates to exactly what we've been talking about. If someone wants to be a pilot,
yeah,
and they're new, maybe they haven't even started enrolling in a flight school yet, or they're in flight school, 2 parts of advice I'd like you to give them. One, is there anybody that should look at, especially becoming a pilot or not be becoming a pilot?
Yeah.
Like, is there a certain attitude or a certain something that really helps, and another thing that says not? And on the other side, if someone's been down that road, you and I have talked about this before, they can go all the way through, pay all the money, get all this commitment done, and then all of a sudden, because of everything we talked about earlier with this HIMSS program and all the FAA stringent regulations, they can be banned before they ever get their first pilot's job.
Yeah.
So can you just speak to kind of those 2 things about becoming a pilot and the pitfalls that you better make sure that before you get that, if they have any issues, like they would want to talk to someone like you first.
Right. So piloting is all about 1, responsibility, and 2, about research, right? R&R. So, when you are a pilot, we have the reg 91.3. 91.3 says you're the ultimate pilot in command and the final authority of that airplane. So every time I step into an airplane, I have to know that it's maintained right, that its paperwork is in order, that its tires have pressure, that its oxygen is filled up, that its nitrogen's filled up, that the fuel is proper and not in somehow affected. I have to go through that entire airplane and make sure that airplane is going to be ready and safe for that flight. The same mentality needs to exist on getting into the industry and becoming a pilot. That's the mentality that you need to have right from the very beginning. So look at this flight school. Do they have their paperwork in order? How long have they been in business? What are the experience levels of their instructors? What's the maintenance level of their airplanes? All that stuff needs to be done first. And I find so often that people will get into a flight school and then they'll start training, and then all of a sudden 3 airplanes are down mechanically for indefinite amounts of time. And that could have been solved had you looked at the flight school ahead of time with a little bit more of a cautious eye or an investigative eye. And the same thing could be said about your medical. So you know that you need to have a good airplane, you need to have good instruction. You also need to have a medical in your pocket to be a pilot. So same R&R, right? All right, what in my life could probably preclude me from being a pilot, right? Have I had asthma? Did I have childhood ADHD? Did I have a surgery? Did I have my tonsils out? Anything like that, right? And as you run through that mental checklist of medical conditions, seek help, right? Call an attorney. It takes nothing to call an attorney and say, hey, can you look at this? Can I ask you these questions? Can I give you all this stuff? What do you think? Am I good to go before I make this huge investment? Am I good to put a medical in my pocket? What do you think about this flight school? I have so many people that call me about a medical, and then while I'm on the phone go, hey, Joe, what do you think about this flight school, right? At the end of the day, we're all pilots too. I mean, pilots are going to talk about piloting. I'm going to give you my advice on it, right?
Yeah.
So that R&R is key, that mentality of making sure you are thorough, you're researched, and you're ready. That's huge.
Awesome. And so I want to wrap it up with this. You mentioned if you're training to be a pilot or you want to be a pilot, you got to know what your medical history is, and including surgeries and medicines and all that kind of stuff. But you can't ask any attorney that. Not any attorney is you can't go to a family law person. You can't go to your uncle, Tito or whatever, and get that information. It's got to come from someone who knows. So if someone wants to reach out to you, reach out to us, and find out these questions, or they have an issue right now with medical and they're a pilot and they're having something going on, or they even want to look at becoming a pilot, how can they reach out to you and your team to just connect with you and with us?
For sure. Zeke's cell phone is... No, I'm just kidding.
hey, Zeke, we love you, man.
I'm just kidding. So we are on, obviously ramoslaw.com/aviation, but we're on every single platform, right? We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. You can reach us online through fill out a submission form on the website. You can call the number on the website. Any way you can get a hold of us, get a hold of us. We are available in so many different platforms and very eager to help.
Thank you, man, Joe. I've had such a great time. Always, I just love being with you, man.
Same.
We need to do more fly fishing, but
yes, sir.
But whether it's talking on the phone or you and I hanging out in our sessions or whatever we're doing, you bring me joy. And I know that for people watching, you guys have experienced the passion that this man has for what he does and his industry. I hope that whatever you're doing, you can feel the same kind of passion as what he does. So, Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
So good. And for you guys out there, please remember, if you found value in this, share it with someone, and stay tuned for the next episode. It's going to be a good one as well. And until we see each other again, continue to get out there and make a difference.